So there's a topic that has been on my mind for a really long time, and I've been trying to come up with a creative way to present it, to talk about it, and I can't come up with something. So I just decided to kind of just share, I guess you could call it a rant. I'm not upset, I'm not angry, I'm not mad, but there's something that just I keep hearing over and over and over, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So I feel like I just need to get it out there. So grading companies. I've said this many, many times, but this might be the first time you're watching something that I've posted. Let me be very, very clear. I want PSA to be successful. I want SGC to be successful. I want BGS to be successful. I want there to be a variety of really good options. And right now, quite frankly, I think we have a variety of pretty good options. But let me even back up before that. I would prefer that we not have grading companies. That would be the best case scenario. But it is what it is, and we are where we are. And quite frankly, I truly believe that the reason we have a need for grading companies is because people buy stuff through the mail. Because people buy cards on eBay or PWCC or whatever the auction house is, or whatever the, Instagram, whatever it is, people need to know that what they're buying and spending good money for, which might be on the other side of the country or even the world, is in the condition that the seller is claiming. And so I really like the fact that grading companies provide us with a service to give the buyer a pretty good idea of the condition of a card. Now, whenever something is done via, humans being in charge of it, there's going to be differences of opinion. There are hundreds of factors that go into card conditioning. Whether the coloring's perfect, how far the coloring's off, how far the centering's off, how much of a touch each corner has. There are so many possible things that could throw off a grade. And so I think that the companies do a pretty good job. I really, really do. Anytime I post anything negative about PSA, and I wouldn't even say I'm trying to post something negative about PSA, but something that is perceived to be negative about PSA, what happens is a bunch of people come out and say, you're crazy, PSA is the gold standard, you don't know what you're talking about. And the other half of the people are saying, that's why I only do SGC, PSA's trash. I don't think PSA is trash. I don't think SGC is trash. I really genuinely believe that for the most part, I think both companies, and you can expand that to other companies as well, do a really good job. But there are some problems. There are some problems that I think we need to talk about. One problem, and I think it's a big problem, is that whatever the grading standard was in the late 1990s, when PSA was really taking off, when SGC was getting into the game, you can't change from what you started with. You can't suddenly say, well, now we're going to use this infrared scanner. Now we're going to use this, AI software. You have to stick with what you started with. And your template or your rubric on what your standards are has to stay the same. So many people have come out and said, well, you're comparing a new grade versus an old grade. The whole point of grading is a standardized set of guidelines that makes something whatever it is. So as soon as anybody admits that a 7 from 2002 is different than a 7 in 2023, the whole thing is like out the window, right? It's gone. The standard can't change. Now, I don't know what happens behind closed doors in these companies. I mean, we've all heard, but if PSA or SGC or any of the companies, any of them, have changed a single thing about how they evaluate a card, then the cards are not being evaluated with the same standard, right? That's important. That's really, really important. If the standard has changed, then I would go so far as to say that's okay, but then we have to know when it was graded. Because if SGC starts doing some sort of infrared scan to look for wrinkles that are hard to see with the naked eye, or PSA starts to use a loop or higher magnification when they're evaluating a card, I'm not suggesting they do these things. I'm just saying if they started doing something, then it needs to be clear when they started doing that. Because all the cards graded from that point on would be held to a different standard, right? So the standardization should be the same for the entire time from when the company started. And if they change the standard, which I don't have a huge problem with if they change the standard. If they started using some sort of technology or equipment, I don't have a huge problem with that. But we need to know when that happened. And here's the most important part that I'm going to get at right now. The most important part is that the serial numbers are not all sequential. Now, famously, the famous Honus Wagner card has the serial number of 1. And you would think that the next card was 2, and then the next card was 3. But that's not exactly how it works. Now, they do tend to have blocks that are sequential, but they're not all sequential. Okay? So why does this matter? This matters because we can't date when a card was graded. So if the standard changed, which it would be best if it never changed, they never started using any new technology and they kept the same standard and the same rubric the whole time. I don't think that's the case. I think that technology is being used now that wasn't used historically. Do I know that? No. I'm just guessing. I'm just assuming that in the evolution of a company over 25 years or so, they're going to be using equipment that they weren't using before. And if that's the case, it's so important for us to know when the card was graded. But the problem is the serial numbers not being sequential make it that we can't backdate when a card was graded. So if the standard has changed, that's an assumption. But if the standard has changed and is more difficult now, all right, and the serial numbers are not sequential, which they're not all of them are fully sequential by SGC and PSA. What that then means is the holder that the card is graded in is really important. And that's why I made a couple of videos talking about the 10 generations of holders that PSA has used and how to identify which holder is which generation to get an idea of when a card was graded, right? That becomes very important because if the standard is changed and if the serial number can't help us date it, then the slab itself can. But PSA allows you to reholder a card now, right? And they've been doing this for a while. You can reholder a card. So you could take a card that was graded in 1998, and you can take that card and send it into PSA, and they put it in a brand new slab. Now, I get that because the card is encapsulated. And if the card gets scuffed in the case, if the case gets scuffed, if the case gets cracked, if the case gets dropped and it interferes with looking at the card, then of course we would want there to be a way to get a new slab. But here's the biggest part of the problem to me. Why do they need a new label? Some of us call them flips. Why do we need a new label? Why can't they take the existing little piece of paper, right? The little slip in the old case and keep it? Why do they need to print up a new one that has the new Lighthouse logo? That has the new, and I understand PSA would say, well, the newer logo, the newer flips, the newer, labels have a lot of things that prevent counterfeiting. And so having the new one prevents and protects the collector from counterfeiting. And that makes sense. I get that. But it also eliminates our way of dating when the card was graded. And to me, that's not a good thing. In my opinion, you could add a little sticker to the label, a little hologram to the label that would make counterfeiting more difficult. But keep the existing label. When you have a new label go onto a card that automatically gets the same grade that it got 30 years ago, and the standard possibly changed, there's too much funny business that could go on. There's too many problems that could go down with that. I mean, am I the only person that feels, I believe that other people feel this way, but again, if we go back through the sequences, the standards should have stayed the same. It feels like they haven't. It feels like technology is being used now that wasn't used before. Which is okay as long as we can date when the card was graded. But the serial numbers are not sequential. So if the serial numbers are not sequential, the only way we can date it is by the holder. And now you can just trade in a holder, which again, you've been able to do for a while. You can just trade in a holder. So if you see a card in a newer holder with a newer label, the assumption is this was recently graded. But if it was graded 30 years ago under, hypothetically, a more loose standard, but we're buying it with the assumption that it was more recently graded, that's a problem. I feel like there's only one solution to this. And I don't understand why it would be a problem. Why can't PSA release a master serial number list? Every serial number in a database and when it was graded, right? Wouldn't that solve it? So you say, we need the new labels because the new label has counterfeiting protections, okay? The new case is nicer and cleaner and makes the card more enjoyable to look at, okay? Collectors want their cards to match their other cases, their other PSA slabs, okay? I'm okay with all of that if they release a master list of every single serial number and the date that the card was graded. Because if the standard is getting harder, I'm not saying that PSA is using a harder standard, but a lot of people seem to feel that they are. I feel like we need to be able to date when a card was graded. So either PSA shouldn't be swapping out old labels for new labels, or they need to be able to share with collectors when a card was graded. I don't see a reason why PSA couldn't or shouldn't release a database of every serial number and the date in which that serial number was graded by PSA. Tell me what I'm missing on why that's not important, why they shouldn't. And please don't just hit me back with because they're bad, because they don't care about collectors, because they're corrupt. I don't think that there's any value in throwing around those accusations. A lot of us have cards. The industry at this point needs the grading companies to stay reliable and to stay legit. So as soon as you start bashing or tearing down one of the grading companies, you're essentially doing damage to the legitimacy of the hobby. But I would not go to somebody and make an offer on a house and have in my hands a assessment, an estimate, an appraisal of the house's value, but have the appraisal from 20 years ago, because things have changed in the housing market. So if the grading difficulty standards have changed, we have to know when the grading occurred. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me if you don't agree. Again, I hate to just get up here with a monologue standing on a soapbox, but I feel like this needs to be out there. I feel like we need to be talking about it because I feel like it's a big problem. And if we don't talk about it, nothing's ever going to happen. But it's a problem. It's a big problem. And we need to get PSA to simply release that database. Am I crazy? Tell me what you think.